Let's discuss about the ITTOs. First, the inputs. There are 7 inputs. First, project charter. The project charter contains a list of key stakeholders and their roles and responsibilities. Second, business documents. In it, there are 2. Business case. The business case identifies the project objectives and identifies the initial list of stakeholders affected by the project. Benefits management plan. The benefits management plan describes the expected benefits of the project. This may identify the stakeholders who can be individuals or groups. Third input is project management plan. It has 2 components as inputs. Communication management plan. The communication management plan will have the list of stakeholders and the communication approach to the stakeholders. This could be your first-hand information to identify the stakeholders. Stakeholder engagement plan. The stakeholder engagement plan identifies the management strategies and actions required to effectively engage stakeholders. Stakeholders are identified during project initiation. That information becomes part of project charter. Also, as project progresses, the stakeholders are identified throughout the project. There are few key documents that can help to identify the stakeholders. Change log. Surprised? Let's look at how is it going to be helpful. Change log contains all requested, approved, and deferred changes. Changes will affect the project, so as the project stakeholders. I hope you got it now. Great. New stakeholders may be added and existing stakeholders may be replaced. Issue log. Issues occurred on a project may introduce a new stakeholders or change in existing stakeholders. Requirements documentation. The requirements documentation will have all the requirements of the project. This may help to identify new stakeholders. The fifth input is agreements. In an agreement, the project stakeholders are the buyers and the sellers are the concerning parties. The agreement may contain reference to additional stakeholders. The sixth input is enterprise environmental factors. Geographical distribution of facilities and resources, global, regional, or local trends and practices or habits, government or industry standards such as regulations, product standards, and code of conducts. Culture and structure of an organization can influence the way the projects are managed and executed. These are some of the key inputs from enterprise environmental factors that are considered as inputs. The seventh input is organizational process asserts. Lessons learned repository with information about preference, action, and involvement of stakeholders. Stakeholder register from previous projects. Stakeholder register templates and instructions. These are all some of the inputs from organizational process asserts. Now, tools and techniques. Expert judgment. For this process, you need SMEs who has a good understanding about the policies and power structure in the organization, knowledge of the environment and culture of the organization and other affected organizations, including customer and the wider environment, knowledge about the industry or type of project deliverable, knowledge of individual team members' contribution and expertise, data gathering. Here, questionnaire and survey and brainstorming are the 2 data gathering techniques that are used. First, questionnaires and surveys. Stakeholders, team members, and subject matter experts may be asked to name other potential stakeholders. They can also provide input on managing those stakeholders. Second, brainstorming. To identify stakeholders, brainstorming can be used to generate ideas from the members, subject matter experts, and stakeholders. Data analysis. There are 2 techniques that are used. First one, stakeholder analysis. Stakeholder analysis helps to understand the stakeholders and their information, such as their position in the organization, roles on the project, their expectations, attitude, whether they support the project or resist the project, and their interest towards the project. Let's look at some of the stakeholders' stake. First, interest. A person or a group can be affected by a decision related to the project or its outcomes. Rights. legal or moral rights of the stakeholders. For example, a government official may be responsible for ensuring the safety practices of the construction site. Ownership, the legal owner of an asset or a property. This could be an individual or group. Knowledge, specialized knowledge that could benefit the project. Contribution, their tangible contribution to the project, such as providing human resources, financial support, etc. And intangible contribution, such as advocacy in promoting the project or acting as buffer between the project and the power structure of the organization and its politics. Document analysis. This is about assessing the previous project file. Lessons learned can help to identify stakeholders, collect information about the stakeholders, and the stakes in the project. The fourth tools and technique is data representation. Here, it's stakeholder mapping or representation. In stakeholders mapping or representation, we are talking about categorizing the stakeholders based on various criteria. Let's look at some of them. Power and interest grid, power and influence grid, or impact and influence grid. I hope you remember this diagram. Each of these techniques group the stakeholders according to the level of authority, which is the power, level of concern about the project outcomes, which is interest, the ability to influence the outcome of the project, which is influence, or the ability to cause changes to the project planning or execution. These classification models are useful for small projects or for projects with simple relationship between stakeholders and the projects or within the stakeholder community itself. Stakeholder cube. This is a refinement of grid model which we previously discussed. This model combines the grid elements into three-dimensional model that can be useful to project managers and team in identifying and engaging their stakeholders community. It provides a model with multiple dimensions that improves the depiction of the stakeholders community as a multidimensional entity. This eases the development of communication strategies. Salience model. This model describes classes of stakeholders based on assessment of their power, that is, the level of authority or ability to influence the outcome of the project. Urgency, example, need for immediate attention, and legitimacy, which is the involvement. The salience model is useful for large, complex communities of stakeholders or where there are complex networks of relationship within the community. It's also useful in determining the relative importance of the identified stakeholders. Let's talk about direction of influence. This classifies stakeholders according to their influence on the work of the project or the project team itself. Stakeholders can be classified in many ways. Let's look at those. Upward. Here, we are talking about senior management of the performing organization or customer organization, sponsor and steering committees. Downward. Here, it's a team of specialists contributing knowledge or skills in a temporary capacity. Outward. It's about the stakeholders group and their representatives outside the project team, such as suppliers, government department, the public, end users, and regulators. Sidewards. Here it's about the peers of the project manager, such as other project managers or middle manager who are in competition for scarce project resources or who collaborates with the project manager in sharing resources or information. The next one is prioritization. In a large projects, there will be a large number of stakeholders, and prioritizing stakeholders may be necessary. Also, prioritization may be necessary when the stakeholder community is changing frequently. Relationship between stakeholders changes frequently, and the relationship between the stakeholders is complex. The fifth and the final tools and technique is meetings. The objective of this meeting is to identify the key project stakeholders of the project. It can be done through facilitation workshop, small group guided discussion, and virtual group using electronics or social media technologies to share ideas. On large projects, it may be appropriate to invite the project sponsor, subject matter experts, and selected team members. Let's look at the outputs. The first and foremost is stakeholder register. Of course, stakeholder register is the primary output of the process. Stakeholder register document contains information such as identification information, such as name, organizational position, location, and contact details and role on the project. Assessment information, such as requirements, expectations, and influential level. Stakeholders classification information based on internal or external, impact, influence, power, and interest, upward, downward, outward, and sideward influence. Remember, the register is created during the initiation of the project and updated throughout the project. The second output is change request. During the first iteration of identifying stakeholders, obviously, there will not be any change request. As stakeholders identification continues throughout the project, new stakeholders or new information about stakeholders may result in a change request to the product, project management plan, or project documents. The next output is project management plan updates. There are 4 project management plan components are updated. Let's look at them. First, requirements management plan. Newly identified stakeholders can impact how requirement activities will be planned, tracked, and reported. Assumptions and risks about new stakeholders may be updated in the assumption log and risk register, respectively. Second, communication management plan. Stakeholders' communication requirements, agreed upon communication strategies, are recorded in communication management plan. Third, risk management plan. When stakeholder communication requirements and agreed upon communication strategies get affected, naturally the approach to managing project risk gets affected. This will get reflected in the risk management plan. The fourth and the final is stakeholder engagement plan. Agreed upon communication strategies for identified stakeholders are recorded in the stakeholder engagement plan. Project documents updates. There are 3 project documents that are updated. First, assumption log. Stakeholders' power, interest, and the engagement related informations and assumptions are documented in the assumption log. Additionally, any constraints related to interacting with the specific stakeholders are also updated. Issue log. New issues raised as a result of this process are recorded in the issue log. Risk register. New risks identified during this process are recorded in the risk register. All right, that wraps up the ITTOs. Let's move to the next process.